Okay, we'll get started. I think we're about 3.5, 4 minutes late, so forgive us for that. My name is Brian Peckford, and I'm here as one of the spokesmen for the Canadian Convoy Truckers 2022. And we want to make a number of statements this afternoon in anticipation of what is likely to happen in this capital later today. We understand that it is the Prime Minister's intention later today to invoke the Emergency Act, which is, I guess, the modern version of the War Measures Act, and to impose this act, if he gets parliamentary approval, upon the nation in response to what the truckers are doing peacefully and under legal and civil disobedience, which is a part of our democracy. To kick things off, I'm going to ask Tamara, who is, of course, one of the great leaders of the truckers movement, to make a statement. Tamara.
Thank you. I am honored to be sitting next to the last surviving founder of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the very document that is now being used against the people it was designed to protect. The federal government is planning to invoke the never-before-used Emergency Measures Act. First of all, we are not afraid. In fact, every time the government decides to further suspend our civil liberties, our resolve strengthens and the importance of our mission becomes clearer. We will remain peaceful but planted on Parliament Hill until the mandates are decisively ended. We recognize that there is a democratic process within which change occurs. We have never stepped outside of that process, nor do we intend to. All Canadians should be surprised, no matter your political opinions, that such an extreme measure could be used against a peaceful demonstration. We have countless vulnerable people in our crowd, including children, the elderly, and the disabled, who cannot be met with force by a genuine liberal democracy. The right to peaceful protest is sacrosanct to our nation. If that principle is abandoned, the government will reveal itself as a true tyranny and it will lose all of its credibility. In that unfortunate situation, we have faith that those politicians, police officers, and military will listen to their conscience. Remember, I'm just following orders has always been an excuse used by those who ignore their moral intuition. But we have faith in you, Canada, to do the right thing. Do not let this become a dark moment in our history. I want to now address all Canadians. We love you all. Some of you might oppose our grievances. However, democratic society will always have non-trivial disagreements and righteous dissidents. There are many reasons for us opposing the mandates. Some of us have been mistreated by our government, including many of our Indigenous communities who have personally experienced medical malpractice. Some of us simply want bodily autonomy and oppose the mandates on principled grounds. No matter our reasons and opinions, it is how the government responds to its citizens that determines the fate of the country. Listen to your hearts, Canadians. Is the Emergency Act the right response to our demonstrations of love and freedom? Now, I want to address the Prime Minister. No matter what you do, we will hold the line.
Hold the line.
There are no threats that will frighten us. We will hold the line. Lastly, to our truckers and friends on Parliament Hill, do not give in to fear and threats. Your courage has already exceeded all of our expectations and inspired an international movement. Be strong, show kindness. Love will always defeat hate. Hold the line. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. This is a very, very strange moment in our history. If what we hear is true from mainly from the mainstream media this time, I guess, that the Prime Minister and the Government of Canada intends to invoke the Emergencies Act. This, as Tamara has said, will be the first time that it's been used. It's the modern version of the War Measures Act, as I understand it, that Justin Trudeau's father invoked many decades ago, and which of course caused a lot of problems, because once again it was a very broad application of an act which really applied even at that time to one province. And so we are again in 2022, looking at a situation, especially as it relates to the Convoy 2022, which is here in Ottawa and in the environs of Ottawa, which is peaceful. The streets are clean. Crime is down since the truckers arrived. And so therefore, it behooves the government, if they are going to proceed on this movement of invoking this act, to prove that this really is necessary to apply to the capital city and to this convoy. We have tried, and I'm speaking on behalf of the truckers now, we have tried very hard to ensure that we are doing things peacefully and that we are exercising our civil disobedience and our rights to civil disobedience. And even over the last number of days, the truckers' representatives have been involved with the city of Ottawa in very serious talks to ensure that the citizens are negatively affected as least as possible. And I think you are aware of some of the latest actions in that regard. So the truckers are not insensitive to the fact that they are in a city. They're in a city where there are citizens who also have rights and freedoms, and that they must be respected. At the same time, it's the truckers' rights must be respected. The other thing is, as some of you may not know, in invoking the Act, the new War Measures Act, the government, after it declares this, must go to Parliament and must pass this through Parliament. They have 7 days, I think, to 7 days to present the matter to the Parliament, and both the Senate and the House of Commons have to vote on it after a debate in the Parliament. And to my understanding of the Act, that there's no limitation on the debate periods, and therefore, hopefully, the government will honour that and not try to bring in some kind of closure measure to restrict debate in Parliament. It will be the truckers' representatives who will argue very hard with the political parties that this is an unnecessary action by the Government of Canada, that this is again a government overreach. We don't do these kind of things in Canada. We engage in dialogue. And it is my understanding that the Government of Canada has not reached out once to the truckers since they have arrived in this capital city. Now, I find that very hard to understand, because how can you justify going to a measure like an emergency measures where a lot of powers can be imposed upon the citizens when you have not even yourself taken any action to engage, first of all, in dialogue? Let's forget the negotiations for a minute. Just natural dialogue, to reach out and say, can we sit down and have a talk, see where the major issues lie, and see if there's any common ground. To move just quickly through, and one is struck by the fact that only a couple of days ago the province of Ontario issued an emergency order, and now we have only a few days later the anticipation that the federal government is doing that. Was this all planned? Is this all orchestrated to try to heighten heighten the fear in people in Canada, so they think this is all justified? The other thing that's really bothersome to me, not only as a Canadian but as somebody who helped craft the Charter of Rights and Freedoms right here in this city a little over 40 years ago, which was a constitutional document which is supposed to be able to stand the test of time. And one of the principles of that charter is that if governments initiate any moves to undermine the freedom of a religion, or the freedom of conscience, or the freedom of thought, or the freedom of expression, or the freedom of movement, of association or assembly, or if they're going to move against life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if they're going to move, or I should say security of the person, if they're going to move to try to restrict travel in the nation from me being able to travel across the nation or any citizen, or they're going to somehow override one's equality before the law, they have to, even if Section 1 does apply, which I would argue it doesn't, they have to demonstrably justify their actions. That's a pretty strong onus. And in the Oates case back in 1986, a judge of the Supreme Court indicated what a high bar that will be for the governments to be able to meet, to eliminate the individual freedoms and rights of Canadians contained in that charter. So there's a great onus upon the government of Canada when they start initiating these kinds of actions, that they must be consistent with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in all its measures. And remember, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms also says, whereas this country is founded on the principles of the supremacy of God and the rule of law, that this must also come into play. And that the Constitution of this nation, not the Emergency Act, the Constitution of this nation is the supreme law of Canada. So it's within that context that I, as a citizen and a person who was involved in the creation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, must take issue with what I anticipate to be an action against the people of this country through the Emergency Act. This is completely unnecessary to apply to the truckers, and we will, as I said, because I've been informed of this by the trucker leadership, that we will, over the next days and weeks, if this particular declaration moves to the House of Commons and the Senate, and we will actively argue against any such measure being passed by the Parliament of Canada. And we hope that by the end of the day, and that will be 2 or 3 weeks from now, we hope, because we want robust debate and we don't want any closure on this by the Government of Canada, that it will give time for representatives not only of the truckers, but representatives of Canadians from coast to coast to coast to speak about this unilateral, this kind of action that the Government of Canada is taking, killing a fly with a sledgehammer. This is completely and absolutely unnecessary. I'm also very hopeful, because I understand that the Prime Minister and the Government of Canada have consulted with both, or at least informed the opposition parties and have informed the provinces or the premiers. I hope before this day is out that this enactment happens by the government, that they move ahead on their intention to introduce this Emergency Act, that the premiers will come out and say, as I am saying, that this is completely unnecessary, and that they will speak up. Hopefully the members of Parliament before this day is out will speak up. We want to know where every single member stands. No vacillation, no this way, that way, no wiggle room here. We want to hear from all of the members of Parliament and the members of the legislature right across the country, all 14 legislatures. Where do you stand on all of this? And make it clear, because we are at a very historic moment in our history to see this act being invoked for the first time against peaceful demonstration and civil disobedience. So I guess what we're saying is that we're putting the Prime Minister and the Government of Canada on notice. If they move ahead with what we understand from the press is they're going to do later today, is to enact this declaration of emergency and then bring it to the Parliament of Canada, that we will stand strong as we have to date to oppose these unnecessary moves against the freedoms and liberties of every Canadian.
A question for Tamara? Or for Brian or Tamara, just a quick question. The protest in Windsor ended pretty peacefully. A few arrests, but most of the people just drove away or walked away. Could this end the same way as it ended in Windsor? Just people just go based on police coming in?
I don't know what happened in Windsor, so I'm not familiar with that. I know it happened in the last few hours or whatever.
Well, they all left pretty peacefully. Just a dozen arrests. They walked away. They drove away.
They were arrested.
It's all clear now. Could this end the same way it ended there, do you think?
Well, as I understand it, if you're saying to me whether if the police start to move in and then everybody walks away, listen, as the truckers have said, as Tamara has said here today, we are going to hold the line.
Question for Ms. Leach. Today in Coots, Alberta, the RCMP arrested 11 people who were found having firearms, ammunition, body armor in their trailers at the blockade site. Can you assure people in this community that none of the protesters who were here have firearms in their trucks or vehicles?
I don't believe they do.
No.
That's a lie.
Complete lie. Does anybody here have firearms in their trucks?
As we know it, crime has gone down in this city since the truckers came. So what you're saying doesn't bear any evidence whatsoever.
Thank you. Hold the line, everybody.